Excuse me, do you mind if I join you? Are you sure you don't mind? You're absolutely sure I won't be disturbing you?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Your opportunity has become extremely limited. Your choice of lunar plot depends on you to make the move, and now is the time to secure your space on the moon. We have been working hand in hand with Japanese, Chinese, and Russian governments to prioritize real estate. Initial investment opportunities have dwindled as demand has risen. As you can see, American flags mark the areas where our astronauts and remote landers have touched down on the lunar surface since 1969. Plots available to the Japanese are marked off, as well as the Chinese and Russian real estate. No other country has reached across the surface of the moon like we Americans have over the years. It is a tribute to our industrialism, determination, and steely composition as faithful people. To quote Albert Einstein, capitalism has brought with it progress, not merely in production, but also in knowledge. We echo those wise words today. We now ask for your help in order to secure a vast majority for our country. The world is catching up, so be a stakeholder today. Invest in the corporation's mission to create a safe and habitable lunar living for your children and grandchildren.
Paid for by the corporation. Remember, we own you.
Hello and welcome to the Mental Suppository. I'm your host, Brett M. Herholtz. My guest today is author Johan Michaels. His first full-length book, Future Machine, was released in March of 2020, and its direct sequel, Warpaint, was released in November of the same year. The third installment in the Future Machine trilogy is currently in the works. He is also the author of 3 short stories. Johan, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Brett.
I didn't refer to you as a science fiction, horror, or fantasy author because I get the distinct impression you're somebody who doesn't want to stick to one genre. You kind of want to experiment. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I would say so. I kind of like it being a little bit nebulous where I'm able to transverse genres if I have to. I might bring certain elements in that are supernatural into a story. I kind of tend to gravitate towards definitely sci-fi is like a passion of mine. You know, I'm a Star Wars kid, born in the same year Star Wars came out, 1977. So grew up on Star Wars and comic books, even through the 90s when it wasn't cool to like these things, you know.
Right.
You would get beat up or you'd get harassed or made fun of because you like certain things, and it just wasn't the cool thing. And I think, you know, kids nowadays, they have it really easy with Marvel movies because everybody loves Marvel movies. You know, comic books are in and popular, and the movies are better quality now than
oh, absolutely.
when we had comic book or video game movies, you know, that were completely horrible back in the day.
There are always a few good ones, but yeah, most of them were, yeah.
Yeah, when you're like, okay, Super Mario Brothers movie, man, this Dennis Hopper as King Koopa, this is going to be really bad.
Shaquille O'Neal is Steel.
Yeah. So there's that part of it where we've gone through the hard times of liking a certain genre, and now we're on like the plus side of it, where we're able to, I don't know, give some guidance or have some reflection, I guess,
right,
on kind of where things have gone in the last 40 years, I guess.
Yeah.
So sci-fi is kind of my thing. Star Trek Next Generation, I got into that really late, in my late 20s and early 30s. I started watching that as like kind of a first-time viewer on Netflix, and binged almost all the episodes except for the ones with Q. I could not stand that guy. So I just skipped whenever he was involved in an episode.
I can understand that. There are people that absolutely love the character, but you know,
I can't do it. I have really tried. I'm sorry. If anybody listening likes Q, think about it again.
Yeah, don't write him hate mail.
Right. So yeah, sci-fi is always like number one for me, mainly because of Star Wars. Just such a big impact on my childhood, on my development, things that I was interested in. And then horror kind of evolved with that, of not so much the slasher films or writing, but more of the supernatural elements. I like a good ghost story.
Yes.
Or a book or a movie or a TV show. That stuff really appeals to me, where it's not super gory or bloody, but it has more of a psychological kind of tint to it.
Right.
So that's where I approach my writing from for the horror short stories that you mentioned. I have 3 published so far. This March is actually my 2nd year anniversary of beginning this whole writing journey. So I am a brand new author. I don't claim to know everything. I'm still kind of learning the ropes as I go, and so far so good, I think, for what I've put out there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Actually, it's funny when you mentioned, you're leaning towards science fiction or science fiction, because I've always kind of wondered with a lot of authors tend to stick to a certain genre. Maybe they'll play around with another genre, but certain authors will write like science fiction or fantasy or horror, and I just kind of wondered if sometimes that's more their preference, or if that's more their readers find they gravitate more towards that person's style of that person's style when they're writing in like that certain genre.
I think it comes down to the publishers too, and this is where
that was the other thing. Yeah,
this is where an indie author really comes into play. Is that I'm not restricted by anybody but myself. J.K. Rowling wrote as a mystery writer, I think, as another name, completely different pen name, and obviously people found out who it was after some time.
Right.
But she didn't want the association of Harry Potter and what that means to this style of writing. Which I totally get, and it's hard not to pigeonhole yourself into doing something for too long, where it's too similar, and maybe as an artist you're not really growing from your experiences. I think for my journey so far in almost 2 years is I've progressed pretty steadily into this new medium. For me, coming as a visual artist, kind of making this flip. I'm able to critique my own work. I'm always looking for feedback from friends and strangers, new readers to the stuff. And just because I'm so new to this, I take all of this in, and I'm able to hopefully craft a little bit better stories. I'm, learning the ropes, learning the language a little bit more, and getting a little bit deeper into character development and plots and world building, which has been really fun. It's been a really awesome experience so far.
Oh, that's great. Actually, it's funny you mentioned the J.K. Rowling not wanting her work connected with Harry Potter with her other work, because it made me think of like Mel Brooks doing The Elephant Man, where he didn't want his name on the movie because he was afraid that, he wanted David Lynch to shine, and he was afraid if people saw his name attached to it, they would think it's going to be like a Elephant Man, the History of the World version of The Elephant Man.
Was he originally tapped for the director?
I think he was just if I remember incorrectly, he was just in an executive producer role. He was just
okay. So he was still involved in the movie.
Yeah, he loved David Lynch's work, and he wanted to produce this movie, but he didn't want his name on that because he figured it would give the movie a certain stigma, because he was known for doing a certain type of
comedy.
Comedy.
Yeah. And you can't have that association with this movie. I remember seeing that actually in high school. It was probably in English or science class. I don't remember which. And it was when they would wheel in the cart and, had the TV and VCR, and they were strapped down tightly.
I remember those days.
And as a student, you're like, yes, it's movie day.
Yeah, I don't have to do work, finally.
Right. So I remember seeing that movie. It was shocking at the time. As a kid, you're like, oh, black and white movie, whatever.
Yeah.
But that definitely struck a chord with me growing up. I didn't know who David Lynch was at the time. This would have been early 90s.
Probably, yeah.
Twin Peaks was beyond me. That was too adult for my sensitive
I didn't watch
nature.
that at the time, yeah.
Watching it recently, though, I love David Lynch. His stuff is really great.
I actually first saw Eraserhead in college. A friend in college had it on video. Yep, we used to watch it on video, kids, and it was like one of these like really bizarre. I couldn't follow it, but visually, I thought it was a fantastic film.
Sometimes that's totally fine if you don't get the story. I've seen Brazil 5 times, and I'm still like, what?
Terry Gilliam's films could be like that, though. He has a few films that you're just like,
you cock the eyebrow. That's what you do.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like, visually, I mean, Jonathan Pryce with the giant wings and the metal suit in that movie is still a great image. But yeah, it's one of those movies. And Michael Palin just plays such a bastard in the film.
Which is a rarity for him.
Yeah, he just plays he plays a really good villain in that film, and it's such a surprise because you don't expect it.
Yeah.
And he just comes off as so cold-blooded. He's like, and this is nice old Michael Palin who does his travel logs.
I need to watch that for the 6th time, I think, and maybe I'll pick up some things that I didn't before.
But actually, getting back to your work, you actually paint a very interesting look at the future. It's like, and what I really liked about it is you didn't really stick with like between the two books, you didn't just stick with one theme. I mean, with the first book, you had like this sort of a futuristic cyberpunk sort of feeling to it, and with the second one, it was almost felt like a futuristic spaghetti western. And I think it was really great because I think it expanded the world a lot more, and a lot of authors tend to like stick to like one look or one theme to like their series, and I feel like by doing that you kind of limit yourself, whereas what you've done with Warpaint in the second book, you've expanded this world you're creating, and I think it allows it for a lot more ideas and possibilities. It's like it's not just like cities of the future. There's also like this sort of like a futuristic Old West, and I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Again, as like a visual person, I would get bored with the same kind of setting, as a reader or a movie viewer. So changing that up was definitely on purpose to change the atmosphere, introduce new characters. I definitely, when I began writing Future Machine, I had this Akira, the movie, and Blade Runner theme, of in my head. Those are like my go-to. This is what I picture, the future looking like.
I first saw Akira in an animation class when I was in my teens. So.
What was your reaction when you first saw that?
I loved the artwork. Unfortunately, the teacher was very apologetic because it was the dub version. I think that was the only version they could get at the time. But he says,
yep.
So I apologize for the bad American dubs, but I mean the visually it was just such a beautiful film.
It is, and I've since read and finished the manga version of it, which I didn't know the story, as it was written. It's the same author that directed the movie, so he had complete control over both mediums, which was really awesome. And the changes from reading the manga to trying to fit that huge 6-volume series into a 2-hour movie, I could see exactly why he chose certain things and why this character became, completely erased from the movie, and amping up, kind of the violence and the action.
Oh yeah.
For a 2-hour movie made a lot of sense, especially competing with like the Disney stuff that was out at the time. This was so groundbreaking. I think it came out in like '88.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
So for my books, that was kind of my visual idea of what I imagined. I always want to ground my stories in some kind of reality and some kind of truth. And I think for things to be a little bit more believable, you have to have those elements added in. So Future Machine, the whole cyberpunk idea is that there's a massive corporation that's in control of things, and there's some kind of group that wants to fight back against it. And unfortunately, the term insurrectionist has become occupied more recently. Which is the name of my group in this story. How
the heck were you to know?
I didn't. It's a word of of people rising up and fighting back, and I just happened to name them the insurrectionists, and I could have come up with a better term for them.
Yeah,
but it worked at the time. So this story takes place in 2141, the year. So I set it so far ahead because I don't want to be alive when like the actual time happens. Because then you're going to get critiqued. I think it was Mad Max took place in 2019.
That's right.
So like the year comes and you're like,
well, so did Blade Runner.
And Blade Runner.
So did
Yep.
And then you had Back to the Future 2016.
You're right.
Of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
You're right.
And the Jetsons.
All of that stuff. So you're like, none of this happened, which is totally fine. You can't anticipate everything that's going to happen in the future.
It's funny. there was a Mystery Science Theater episode that was like I think it was like the Phantom Planet, where it's like they're there's like spacemen in space, and it's like, and they say the year 1980, and one of the guys is like, oh, the old future.
Right, or the alternate future.
Exactly.
The alternative history of what it was. So I'm playing into a lot of climate crisis stuff that's happening. We're on like the very early end of this. We're not going to see this stuff in real time. Future generations will experience this and probably have some horrible experiences growing up unless things change. Obviously,
Absolutely.
The past 4 years in the administration we've had has really turned the clock back on this 100-fold. It's been terrible watching this happen and being a bystander in this country and seeing bad decision after bad decision made. So like one thing for me is like I found out about permafrost and this layer in the earth that's been frozen for I don't know thousands of years.
Yeah.
Where the temperatures globally are increasingly getting warmer. Greenhouse gases and methane and all this stuff is contributing. Definitely humans are contributing as well to this stuff happening. But, the release of gases that have been trapped in the earth for thousands of years getting into the atmosphere should be terrifying to anybody. And the problem is we have, science deniers that either pretend it doesn't happen or their religion allows them an escape to be like, well, I'm going to be fine. So how do you combat that, right?
Exactly.
You have to bring good science to the forefront, and it's so tough because I want to write like an action story, like boom, this is my thing. Like I want an action story, but I have to set it in some kind of grounded future. So this is the world. It's depleted. Resources are super scarce. There are no books anymore because trees are very limited. The corporation is this mega conglomerate capitalistic company that's taking control over almost everybody's lives.
Very interesting. I found that to be a very interesting part of your book, just reading about the corporation, and you even designed a logo for it, which I thought was great. Or did you? You did. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's the capital letter C with a globe inside of it. I did research ahead of time and didn't find anything similar, so I don't think I'm infringing on anything. But
it reminded me of like old school Doctor Who episodes. They'd have stuff like that, and I absolutely love that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Just having that, you have that, it gives that visual. It gives your readers something to focus on, and it's great advertising for the book too. I
think so. Yeah, and it changes from the first to the second. Warpaint has a big X kind of crossed out, so you can see the impact of the insurrection on this company. And these kind of underground hackers kind of making their way to the forefront into this world. But it's a scary time, I think, for the future. I do want this to be an action cyberpunk adventure. That's how I would label it. But there's definitely tinges of scary future things that could happen if we're not smart as a human society.
So writing this is also a little bit more. It's a little bit of you exercising your own emotions and your own what you're going through right now too, as well.
It's a little cathartic.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for.
Honestly, I don't think I could have written this if Trump wasn't president, because it put us in such a dire space.
Yeah.
That I needed to almost experience this in order to imagine a future that is worse than I could ever imagine. And that's kind of I guess that's kind of where I went with this story. The first book of this cyberpunk action insurrection rising up against the corporation. That's where kind of this headed from.
They say a lot of your best work comes out of times of frustration.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you're kind of thoughtful and reflective about situations. I actually didn't intend to write this book at all. I'm
glad you did.
I'm glad I did too, because I learned a lot. And I'm getting some good responses, which is nice.
Oh, that's good.
But I have a story in my head that I don't think I don't have the skills to write it yet. And right now I am self-publishing. I'm an indie author. Yep. All this stuff is going through the corporation, aka Amazon, because that's
a necessary evil.
It is. That's what you have available as an indie author, is to, especially if you want your books read by a larger population,
Absolutely.
you have to take advantage of these services. So, I'm not paying anything out of pocket to be able to publish a book, which is amazing.
No, that's great. That's
and
one thing I found.
I don't have stock cases of copies sitting, in my basement. It's print to order, which is really nice. Service, and it's available on Kindle as well.
Yeah, and Antu did that. She years ago, she had like stockpiles of a memoir she had written, and it's like, I think my grandfather ended up like inheriting them. So I think I have copies of it. And the books are just like the ramblings of an old lunatic.
What do you do with them, right?
But in an entertaining sort of way.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I know. But that's another thing where publishers, certain publishers, can take advantage of up and coming authors by having them pay them for their work, and all the editing and things like that, where it shouldn't be. If a publisher is really interested in your work, you should be getting paid as an author.
Bingo.
Not the other way around.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail right on the head.
So for me, indie author self-publishing works right now. I have complete control over the story, over the characters, over changes that I want to make, the
direction you want to go in.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm just kind of missing the industry clout that comes along with a higher end publisher that can promote your work. So all the promotion stuff I have to do on my own, which I'm fine with doing.
Yeah.
So actually, to begin this book, I was flipping through a sci-fi story generator on the internet.
Oh.
And I don't remember what it was called. If you just search sci-fi story generator, you can just hit like plot or characters. They'll give you character names. They'll give you alien race names.
Oh, wow.
And I was just clicking through plots, and one after the other, and I was like, this is kind of fun. And I landed on one that stuck with me. I saw it, I wrote it down, I kept clicking, and I was like, you know what? This one sentence is really holding my interest. Could this become a story?
What was the sentence? Or do you want to just save it for the readers?
No, I'll tell you. The sentence was, a priest falls in love with a robot.
Oh, wow. I like it.
And it was that simple. It was, a few words, and I'm like, what would it look like in, let's say 100 years if a priest fell in love with a robot? And that's where the beginning of Future Machine began.
That's fantastic.
And I developed the protagonist, Gregory, and I'm kind of playing around with like, what is this? What does a robot look like in the future? Is it sentient? Does it have emotions? Can it have a full conversation, instead of this like Siri call and response type of thing?
Yeah.
And that's the genesis of Future Machine, was a priest falls in love with a robot.
I think that's fantastic.
And I went like off the rails with all this stuff added into it, but it
takes is one thing.
That's it, right? Inspiration can strike from anything.
Actually, that was what I was going to bring up next. Was I really enjoyed your choice of the main characters. I've talked with friends who have been published and have written books, and have dealt with the difficulty of dealing with publishers and agents who have demanded the characters need to be young and dishy to sell books, and most of them the lead characters being like swashbuckling space pilot pickpockets along with some cyberpunk princess in a metal bikini. I mean, but I think the characters you created to focus on in the book were just far more interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, there's no like slave Leia next to a space slug in the story. That comes down to like the realism and believability of characters in a setting. And I've, again, I'm brand new at this stuff. I've only been writing for 2 years, but I look to people that know what they're doing and try to emulate or try to get an idea of what works before I even try it myself. So I have that kind of like stick-to-itiveness, I guess. So one person I really admired is Dan Harmon, the creator of Community, one of my favorite shows ever. He also is on Rick and Morty. He's creator or executive producer there. So he has this thing called a story circle, where it's kind of based on Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell has like 17 different layers of what makes a good story, and Dan broke it down to 8 steps. So the first one is you establish the protagonist. So if you think of it as a clock face, this is number 12 on the top.
Okay.
2 is there's a need because something isn't right. 3 is go, you have to cross this threshold. So if we're at 3 o'clock on the clock hands,
Yeah.
going 3 down below, now you're going into this underworld unknown space. And then there's a search. There's find. Maybe you have to meet somebody that continues this quest. You have to take. Maybe you're taking something back. You have to pay the price for something that happens. You return back home. So as a circle, you start at home position. You're coming back around home 10 or 11 o'clock. And there's some change. So either the protagonist or the antagonist or the setting or something has some kind of change within that circle and ending up back in the same spot.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of looked at that. Future Machine was written on a 2-page Word doc, an overview. It was kind of that simple as a beginning. And then as I started writing and progressing through the story, I could develop certain characters. And this is kind of the really fun part as a writer, which I'm really enjoying, is developing these characters and kind of getting their points of view and emotions and how they would speak or react to situations. And this stuff just like lived in my head for 6 months. I think it was about 6 months it took me to write the first draft of Future Machine, which is like a 250-page paperback.
Right.
And it's tough to get rid of things out of your head. So
Right.
you're doing your day job, you're working, you're living your life. But within my brain, all these characters kind of lived and interacted, and I had to get this on paper or typed out almost as soon as I could. So it was dedicated nights, probably 1 or 2 hours a night, and then Saturday, Sunday mornings I would sit and write for 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And I didn't do much else but work and have a home life and then try to write this story.
Sometimes it's a good thing just to let it sit, and I hate to use the word stew, but like let it sit and stew in your head for a little while before you just like commit yourself to paper or word processor, just to sort of think how is this world going to work, how is everything going to work out before you.
Absolutely. And you might get influenced by certain things. You could watch the news and see an event come up and you're like, oh, that would be awesome to add in here, where can I fit that in? And if you have things plotted out or you have a rough draft idea, you can always go back in and rework ideas, put plot devices earlier in so it makes sense when they come up later on. And this is coming from a visual artist to this switch has been awesome. There's a lot of similarities from visual art to writing. For me, like a need to create is the biggest thing. I just need to be active in working out things. For me, it is very visual, even though it's written.
Right.
I'm seeing things when I read things. I see them in my head. So there's that. The more experience that you have, as an artist or as a writer, the better your work hopefully is going to get. And we'll see.
Absolutely.
2 years in. You show it to the public, you get critiques, you get feedback, and hopefully you apply what you learned and make some better stuff, in the future.
Well, funny you saying the whole thing about, you work, you hope your work gets better. I found actually, Future Machine was great, but I actually found Warpaint to be a much more interesting and much more enjoyable novel, even though, like I said, Future Machine was a great novel, great starting point. I thought, Warpaint was you got even better with that one.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. It's a bigger novel. It's 422 pages.
Oh yeah.
And I actually found a service called Fabula, Fabula Decks. So it's like a card deck, and it helps plot your story out. So instead of this 1-page Word doc where I had to kind of figure out things, this was a deck of cards that I put up on my wall, my living room wall behind me. And I was able to use sticky notes to kind of plot out characters and story arcs, technology, different antagonists, minor characters that would come in. And you could see this visually as a giant layout of exactly where the story started, the middle, and the ending of where it might end up. And the great thing was, as sticky notes, you can kind of pull these down, you can rearrange them. Maybe this, chapter 13 should be chapter 11 instead.
Okay.
So this was a huge development for me of implementing this and trying it out for the first time. And I agree. I think Warpaint is a much more solid story I'm not trying to. I guess I world build in Future Machine, so you kind of get an idea, and then I can develop the characters better in Warpaint.
Absolutely.
So you have to have those building blocks there. But I'm not like info dumping as much as I did in the first book, which
I actually didn't find it too much
off.
info. I didn't find it to be too much info dumping. I mean,
No.
But actually, one of the things I might be reading way too much into this, but I feel like you made people rethink the idea of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in your story, because just when I thought someone was obviously a bad guy in the story, I immediately had to rethink it.
Yeah. I think there's two sides to every coin, and there's different sides to people. What they show to one person might be different to another. How you respond to somebody might be different than somebody else. This is my friend, he's so great. You have to meet him, and then you meet the person, and you're like, he's kind of a chump.
Yeah, no, I've been that many times.
So there's a bit of that. Like, I don't think there's like a bad person unless your last name is Trump.
Yeah. Definitely.
There's different levels to people. So that's it goes back to the believability of a story. The humanness of people, who their character is, and I guess what they want, what their desire is. If it's an evil desire, you're going to be seen as an evil person.
Right.
If you're kind of a pure of heart type of person, like Gregory, the protagonist, is.
Yes.
That's the lead-in character for the reader. You want to like the main character.
And I did. I actually immediately liked and sort of gravitated towards that character, and just his, just the way he was compared to the other characters who, were a little, they were still great characters, but they all had their like agendas or something.
They did, absolutely.
Whereas he just loved, So Gregory just had very pure motives, I guess. Is that right saying? He had.
Yeah, and he's kind of figuring out the world. So I think a lot of shows and a lot of TV shows and movies do this, where the main character is sometimes discovering things for the first time.
Right.
So as the reader, you're also discovering things along with this protagonist, making their way through the story. And that kind of makes sense, to have someone that maybe doesn't know everything that's going on and kind of learning things as the story progresses, or as things unfold, or new characters are introduced, where the reader is kind of making these connections along with the main character. So yeah, having that person likable and being able to figure things out along with you. You don't want to make the reader feel stupid for anything. You want them to feel like, oh yeah, this is what I discovered. You don't want to talk, I don't know, in a negative way, I guess, towards the reader. But yeah, that seemed to work for the first book. It expanded in Warpaint, where it's a group of people instead of just Gregory. So you have the insurrection flying west,
right.
Southwest to Arizona.
Yes.
They get some help along the way. Certain characters that might have seemed bad or had an agenda might have changed over time. There are sentient androids in the story, which is an interesting thing to think about in the future of, can you walk around and have people that kind of look like you or enough like you that you can interact with, or maybe they're performing tasks down to like robot doctors. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
In 100 years, I could believe a future that kind of goes along that way.
At the beginning of the interview, I had actually mentioned, the space of time in which you published both Future Machine and Warpaint, and many of the listeners might be thinking, "Wow, 2 full novels in just a year." But what they might not understand is you had been writing these novels that starting the summer before, and so I didn't know if it was one of these things when you were writing it that you finished Future Machine and then started with Warpaint, or was it one of these things that was just like kind of like it was just like you went right, you had already started writing into Warpaint as you were writing Future Machine, and then you just decided to cut it off, and this was the end of the first novel and this was the beginning of the second novel, and sort of took it from there. Yeah,
I definitely stopped after writing Future Machine. That was a long process. 6 months is a pretty long time to dedicate to anything. So I started writing a short horror story first. Room for Rent
okay.
was the first thing I ever wrote, and self-published. And it's like 6,000 words. That probably took me a month to write that. And I was just trying to figure things out. And that was based on an old story I wrote for a college assignment.
Oh, wow.
That I kind of resurrected, and I developed a little bit more, better characters and setting, and how it unfolded. So I wrote that, and then I was like, all right, I'm going to write a sci-fi novel next. Let's do this. And it took a long time, and I had a blast doing it, but I also learned a lot. So I definitely had to stop, first draft stop, and I had 3 beta readers, good friends, always great to get feedback. So if anybody's writing, kind of don't know what to do next, get feedback from people, have them read stuff. My wife read it first, and I had 3 good friends give me a bunch of notes on it. And while they were doing that, I wrote my second short horror story.
Okay.
The Skeleton and Gelatin.
Yep, which I still think is a great title.
So that actually came from a Simpsons. It wasn't a Treehouse of Terror, but it was like a Thanksgiving horror episode where somebody's arm was going into this gelatinous, like the blob type of thing, and it became a skeleton arm. And I was like, skeleton and gelatin, that's like such a good rhyming, weird word. Phrase.
But it has a right good sound to it for some reason.
It does.
It fits.
Yeah. So I wrote that. I published that. I got my feedback from Future Machine, and then went to work on the second and third drafts of that, and then kind of finalized it and published that in March. Took a break, and then started Warpaint. I didn't know exactly where the story was heading for the second book. I had a vague idea from the first one where I ended things off and where the characters kind of stopped. I always think it's good, going back to Star Wars, how Empire picks up on Hoth, where it's a completely alien planet from the first movie. It's a whole new scenario. There's new characters, the Wampa for the first time, or these droid, flying around the snow. That was kind of my inspiration for Warpaint, where I wanted to change settings completely and have a new environment. So I set the second book. The first book was in DC in Baltimore, and the second book is in Arizona, in this kind of sleepy farming town of Willow Creek. And that kind of is my ode to the moisture farmers of Luke on Tatooine. A little nod to that. So I think it's always good to kind of change that up and change settings and scenarios. And I'm happy where it kind of went as a writer in developing this story. Again, the deck building of Fabula worked out awesome for me. Trying to plot this novel, I couldn't have come up with certain scenarios or added things in without this. So I finished Warpaint in the summer of last year, published that in the fall of last year. I haven't started the third book yet, but I kind of know where it's going, and I'm kind of working that out in my head.
Giving a little time to let the engines cool till you...
You gotta let things digest before you can take another bite.
That's completely understandable, so...
Yeah.
But it's funny, as someone who writes myself, I find myself thinking of certain people or actors as I'm working on particular characters for a graphic novel. I mean, did you find when you were writing characters or developing them that there were certain people you knew, or actors or personalities that you kind of associated with the particular character you were creating?
There is a character in one of my short horror books, stories, that is based on my brother. I'm not going to say which story or which brother.
Right.
So yes, there are people that you interact with as a writer, and as reflective people, I think you and I both are, where it just kind of sits there in your head, and you're like, I either can't wait to write them into a story, or you're like, oh my gosh, this person is just like this person. Let me see if I can work this into something. So I don't have like actors in mind.
Okay.
Obviously, I think Future Machine and Warpaint would be fantastic movies at some point.
Oh, I do too. Absolutely.
And I can imagine characters being in those roles. Captain Maka is the protagonist in Future Machine, who's just a badass militant person.
Right.
And I think Charlize Theron would be absolutely perfect.
Oh gosh, yeah, I could definitely see that.
So I have like a little bit of a cast thing in my head. Of course, I think of like dead actors that would be also fantastic for this role as well.
Well, that was kind of the thing I was thinking, because I'm reading the book and I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing that same thing, thinking, I'm thinking of this person for this character and that person for that character, but that might not necessarily be who you're thinking of when you're creating the characters or you're plotting the books out. Or like you said, if Future Machine and Warpaint were to be turned into a movie, which I think they should, who would you consider casting? I mean, there was an interview where Tim Burton said he originally wanted Sammy Davis Jr. as Beetlejuice, which
what a different movie that would be.
I know it surprised me at the first, but at the same time, I think it would kind of work. I think it would work.
Yeah,
because he was a character. So
that's interesting. I think that's fine. It's almost better, I think, as a book to imagine the characters yourself, and I don't go into over descriptions of exactly what they look like, because it's fun to imagine things. As kids, we play make-believe all the time.
Absolutely.
We use our imaginations, and then as adults, for some reason, it's just not encouraged anymore.
Yeah.
And
it's frowned on. Yeah.
You can't play as an adult, which is unfortunate. And
you can't have an imagination.
I will continue to play, damn it, until my dying breath.
Good. I couldn't agree more.
So I'd rather
have the part, not the dying breath part.
Not the dying part, right? I hope that comes way later.
Me too.
With my history, I have about a novel a year, so 40 more novels maybe. We'll see.
No, that'd be great. I'll be looking forward to reading them.
Yeah. No, for characters, I think it's better in the reader's imagination to kind of imagine who they look like, or I don't know. I give brief intros of their personalities and visual descriptions, but I don't do a lot of detail in that.
No, that just shows every author sort of has a different approach to the way they create their stories. But we mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about how you self-publish both Future Machine and Warpaint. I bring this up because I think self-publishing and print on demand has gotten kind of an unfair stigma at times. And I know plenty of writers who have published via Lulu and Amazon, also Kindle Direct.
Yep.
And one of the problems is traditionally bookstores have been hesitant to support print on demand authors because they have not wanted the inventory that they might have to not be able to return. But with things moving to digital, do you think the views on print on demand authors are gaining more support?
Yes. I think there's still a lot of crap out there, and unfortunately your books will get lost with a lot of other things that are similar.
Yeah.
For instance, on Kindle Direct Publishing, you have to choose keywords for your book to come up in searches. Obviously, the title or the author's name is one. I have a running list actually of keywords that I use. So science fiction is like huge. It's almost too big. So you have to kind of define it within there. So if you add science fiction dystopia or science fiction cyberpunk,
right?
Or I have one, cyborgs and androids. If somebody types that in, there's a better chance that you'd find my books.
Right.
So there's a lot of smart choices as an indie author that you have to learn and apply for you to be found in searches. And this is, again, one of the harder things about being an indie author is everything is on you to do this, the promotion aspect and things like that, where a publisher would be able to do this,
right?
With no money spent. It'd be very easy for them to do.
I suppose with great freedom comes great responsibility.
Somebody said that.
Sorry.
So unfortunately, there's just a ton of stuff out there, and the competition is probably the hardest part of being found as a writer.
I think one of the most frustrating things with print-on-demand publishing is some of the IR writers that have kind of come out that have kind of sometimes given print-on-demand a black eye, like the 50 Shades of Grey and all the knockoff 50 Shades of Grey that have come out and just people.
So many. It's way too many.
So exactly. And
Bare-chested men on book covers. I'm
yep.
sick of seeing it.
Apparently now there's a book called Kissing the Coronavirus, which is a romance novel about a woman who falls in love with the coronavirus. And I'm just like,
why not?
What?
But here's the thing. If you know of it, that person is a successful writer. It doesn't matter what the story is. They've already made bank because
this is true.
Somebody like you has heard of it and knows about it.
I think somebody just posted it, posted on their Facebook page. I'm just like, what? Is this a real thing? And then you post, it's like, oh, son of a gun, it's a real thing.
So if they wanted to be a successful writer, can they go from that to a new novel? Under that name, probably not. They might have to choose another new pen name.
Right.
But that's totally fine because you have that option.
Yeah. Actually, you hit the nail right on the head there.
Yeah.
You'd also mentioned there's a third novel in the works. Can you devise any information about it, or will the corporation come after me?
The corporation is always watching us at all times. How can I say this without giving too much away? The Warpaint ends on a cliffhanger.
Yes.
You're waiting for something to happen now as a reader of what's going to happen to these certain characters. I can tell you that it takes place entirely on the moon. So again, changing the setting, kind of developing some characters a little bit differently. I'm approaching the third book as a kind of more of a suspense, less action, tinges of horror. That's where I'm going with that one. So vastly different than the two other reads, but it still completes the circle, and completes what I would call this as a trilogy, even though I might develop a few more volumes in the future of certain kind of spin-off characters. I could see maybe some backstories or I don't know, adventures and beyond these three books. But yeah,
never say never. One
never
of those
say
things.
Never.
Yeah.
I can give you the title if you would like the title as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to be called Surface.
Nice. And also, right when you said it's going to be suspense, I think that's fantastic, because it kind of sets it apart from the first two books, which the second book is kind of set apart from the first one. So it just gives, like I said, it continues to expand this world you're creating for however long you decide to create it for.
Yeah, and it's unlimited possibilities, really, for me at this point with this series. I might try to write something and publish traditionally in the future, but as a writer, I'm only 2 years in. I want the experience, this whole thing under my belt before I even approach something like that.
Well, as we speak about the next book, I want to mention something. I know we always say never judge a book by its cover, but let's talk about the covers.
All right, let's do it.
Especially the amazing cover artist you brought on board, Scott Boilard, or did I pronounce that right?
Scott Boilard.
Boilard, thank you. Sorry,
Yep.
Scott. But he created these. If you can see, if you're seeing them right now, if you're watching it on YouTube, he had created these amazing covers that I think really evokes the feel of, especially Warpaint, evokes the feel of the 80s book covers. And Scott is just, I can't say enough about Scott's artwork.
He is one talented dude.
Yes.
I've always respected his work. He's been in the art scene around Worcester, Mass for, 20 years or so. And I knew that I wanted to tap him to create these covers. It's nice to hire somebody to create original work, especially if it's a friend. And he and I sat down, we talked about the characters and the setting and the feeling of what these would become. And I think he nailed it. Captain Maka is on the cover of Future Machine. You have this kind of dystopian world. We have the insurrection back here raising their fists in this kind of fiery inferno. We have drones flying in the sky. I also wanted a painterly approach to covers because everything is so digitally saturated.
I know.
I'm sick of looking at these covers where it just looks so fake. It looks like a horrible Photoshop job. Yeah. And for some authors, that is fine for them because it just is trying to get their work out there to readers, which I get. But for me, I need to have the feeling of something that is, that works for me visually as well as, the writing.
I think a good example of it, if you ever want to look it up, was Batman's The Dark Knight Returns in comparison to the follow-up Frank Miller did, Dark Knight Strikes Again. Dark Knight Returns, the colorist did everything. I think it was either in gouache or it was painted. It was either gouache or watercolor. It was just like these beautifully painted, colors. And in Dark Knight Strikes Again, they just did it all on Photoshop, and it just looks awful.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, and it wasn't even a very good Photoshop job. It was like a very flat, very basic like Photoshop designs, and like compared with the original book, it was just like yeah.
When you have too many of the similar book covers on the shelf, what's going to set you apart?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was my approach with hiring Scott. Fantastic artist, illustrator, fine artist. He can do it all. Yeah, I'm super psyched. He will come back to do the third cover as well.
That's fantastic. I mean, when
Future Machine.
When I found out you were going to be going with him as the cover artist, I knew of his work, and I knew he does, this just amazing work that some of it can be very surrealistic, and I think that was just the right feel for the story you were telling. He just had that right look to it.
Yep.
So I immediately thought, like, that's the guy.
The cover of Warpaint, there's the main antagonist on there named Jabez. And I had to give him... He was also
an interesting character, too, in the book.
He was.
Not to give too much away.
You kind of don't know his alliances sometimes.
Right.
I gave Scott a little bit of notes of where I wanted his facial features to go, and gave him one actor reference, which he totally nailed, which I'll tell you was Jack Palance. That's
perfect. I mean, when it comes to like when I said spaghetti western space and you said Jack Palance, I was like, yeah, either him or like a Lee Van Cleef, like the good, the bad, and the ugly sort of those sort of characters.
Grizzly, gnarled looking guy. Yeah, he's been around.
The old gunslinger who, like you said, you don't know who his allegiance to. And yeah, it just had that. I just remember all those great covers from like those painted covers from the 1980s.
It's almost a lost art form now.
It is.
It's a throwback retro feel. And
I'm glad you brought it back.
I'm glad
you brought Scott in.
It worked, man.
Yeah, it did.
Both of these books.
But actually, wrapping it up, I didn't know if you wanted to maybe give the readers a little bit of a taste of one of your books, just to kind of reel them in.
Sure.
Because I recommend everybody, after you've listened to this, please, where can people find copies of your book, both printed and on Kindle?
Kindle and print paperbacks are on Amazon. If you search for Future Machine or my name, Johan Michaels, you should be able to find those. My 3 short horror stories are on there. Skeleton and Gelatin, Room for Rent, and Urbex is my newest one I just published this month. You can also find the paperbacks signed by myself and artist Scott Boylard only at That's Entertainment in Worcester on Park Ave.
A great store, and if you get a chance, go down there and give them your support. If you live in the Worcester
area. You have a couple things there, don't you?
I very well might. Actually, I might have to go down and restock. I'm actually not sure.
Nice.
But do you want to give the readers a little bit of a taste? Which book do you want to choose to read from?
I'll read the very beginning of the first Future Machine book.
Oh, fantastic.
Starting at chapter 1. We've got one. Check your map. A voice echoed in the earpiece of Officer Lane as he sat in the cockpit of a sleek gray drone. With a tap at his temple, a red visor materialized in front of his eyes. I see him. Looks like he's alone, he responded. More insurrectionist pacts. Do you have a bearing on him? He's heading toward Logan Circle on 13th Street, the voice said. Yeah, I've got a visual, Officer Pax replied. A large yellow moon hung low over the rooftops, casting long black shadows on the empty street below. Officer Pax shifted his weight on his back foot and braced the butt of his rifle against his shoulder as he peered through the scope. A flickering digital crosshair appeared on the target 2 blocks away. Officer Pax said, He's heading my way, waiting for a clear shot. A loud hum reverberated between the buildings as Officer Lane's drone hovered into position, gliding just above the road. He tapped a round green icon on his dashboard and launched 2 small pods into the air. Their sides opened up to reveal a menacing lens and curved black wings as they took flight nearly 30 feet above his head. The figure immediately ducked down between the drone and the large cement barrier and reached into their black leather jacket, pulling out 2 flat discs. They twisted the edges to prime the explosives. A red light blinked on the bottom. "They're out of sight, Lane. Where did he go?" Pax asked. "He's still there. Hold your position." "Captain, do you want them dead or alive?" Officer Lane asked. The voice crackled once again in the earpiece of the officers. "Alive, gentlemen. You know the drill. Bring them to me once you've apprehended the suspect. Over and out." "You heard the captain. Let's move in," Officer Pax said. The figure crouched low to the ground and tossed the discs into the street, watching them skid a few feet away in the middle of the road. Gloved hands pushed off the ground as they jumped to their feet and backed up against a building. The drones whipped into action and sped up in their direction. 2 blue eyes shone brightly in the darkened sky, casting a reflective glow on windows. "I see him. Flush him out towards me and I'll take the shot," Officer Pax said. The figure sprinted down the sidewalk, weaving their way between shadows as Officer Lane's headlights illuminated the center of the street from a block away. He watched in disbelief as the 2 drones burst into flame from a projectile on the ground, causing them to sputter and drop from the sky. As he approached the wreckage, he slowed to a stop and got out of his vehicle. "Just a little more," Officer Pax's voice trailed off as he moved his index finger to the trigger and breathed in. The white crosshair flickered faster on the figure's chest through the scope. Officer Lane knelt down to inspect the disc, about a foot wide, lying on the ground. A fine gray powder hung in the air, along with a burnt metallic smell. "Smart," he thought. "Got him," Officer Pax calmly said and squeezed the trigger. A short burst of blue electric light shot through the darkness and made contact with the person, sending him backwards into the windshield of a parked drone. Officer Lane looked up when he heard the crash of glass and a voice scream out. "Yeah!" Pax exclaimed and threw his hands in the air in celebration. Lane left the drone and began to walk down the street to meet up with the suspect, now crumpled on broken glass. His visor displayed information on the person in small white text in front of his eyes. Pax caught up with him and held his hand up for a high five, which Lane ignored. "Come on, man, don't leave me hanging," he said. "Maddox isn't going to be pretty happy with this. Nice shot, Pax. I wasn't sure you were capable of bringing down such a tiny female perp. She must be what, 110 pounds? Officer Pax glanced down at the figure and noticed that she was bleeding from her head. A mass of twisted brown hair seemed to be stuck to the broken windshield. "The fuck is she wearing?" Officer Pax asked. The woman was dressed in a mix of denim and leather, crudely stitched together in an outfit. Splashes of green paint accented her clothing. "Better call in an ambulance. We can escort her to the hospital and let the captain know," Officer Lane said as he pressed his temple. "Ambulance," he spoke in the warm night air.
That was from Future Machine, written by Johan Michaels. Future Machine and Warpaint are available on Amazon.com, as well as his other short stories, which are also available if you want signed copies of them at That's Entertainment in Park Avenue in Worcester. Thank you for being on the show, Johan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to The Mental Suppository. Next week, we will be talking with author Paul Mars about his series, The Brenda and Effie Mysteries, as well as some of the new projects he's working on. Until then, this is Brett M. Herholtz saying,
I knew I'd disturb you.
The Mental Suppository has been produced by Brett Herholtz and Jamie Billings and distributed by M the Media Project. Theme music generously donated by Mr. B, the Gentleman Rhymer. Visit his webpage at gentlemanrhymer.com. We would love to hear from our fans. Email us at mentalsuppository@gmail.com.